He was beaten, bruised, and left to die in a cold, dark alley by men with no mercy in their hearts. His face was swollen, his clothes soaked in blood, his breath, faint and broken like a candle in the wind. He didn't know if he'd live to see morning. He couldn't even cry for help anymore. But just as the shadows of death began to wrap around him, a pair of trembling hands touched his chest. A voice whispered, "You're going to be okay." She didn't know him. She had nothing. She was just a struggling single mom. But that night, Rachel became his miracle. What she didn't know was, the man she just saved from dying in the alley was Richard Okezie, one of the most powerful billionaires in Africa. A man hiding secrets, running from a betrayal, and now, caught between life, death, and a woman who didn't ask for anything in return. If this story touches your heart already, subscribe now. Comment below what you'd do if you were Rachel. And most of all, watch this video to the very end. Because what happens next will leave you speechless. Richard Okezie was not just any man. He was the kind of man whose name opened doors in high places. If he stepped into a room, even politicians stood to greet him. They said he had money longer than the Atlantic Ocean. And yet, very few people knew his story. Born in the dusty streets of Enugu, Richard grew up with nothing but hunger in his belly and fire in his bones. His mother sold pap by the roadside. His father? No one ever knew who he was. Some said he died. Others whispered he ran away. But Richard never cared. All he knew was survival. As a young boy, he hawked bread, washed cars, and sometimes slept under bridges. But what made him different from every other child on the street was his dream. He didn't just want to be rich. He wanted to build an empire so big, the world would never forget his name. At 15, he taught himself how to fix computers using torn books from trash bins. At 17, he launched a cyber cafe in a rented container using a faulty generator and borrowed laptops. By 25, he had developed one of Nigeria's first online fintech platforms, QuickPesa, which allowed people to transfer money across Africa without bank queues. The app exploded like wildfire. Investors came. Foreign partnerships followed. Within 5 years, Richard Okezie became a billionaire, quietly. He was never flashy. No gold chains. No loud cars. No wild parties. He preferred black t-shirts and old sneakers. The media tried to follow him, but Richard hated cameras. He avoided interviews, ignored awards, and rarely posted on social media. He believed in building in silence. But behind the silence was a reason. You see, Richard had enemies. Not just business rivals, but people who had once eaten at his table. People he trusted. People he loved. One of them was the reason his life was almost cut short. But before that dark night in the alley, Richard had already felt something cracking inside him. He had money. He had power. He had everything. Except peace. Behind the high walls of his mansion in Banana Island, Richard would stare out of his massive glass window and wonder. Is this all there is? Money couldn't fill the emptiness. Luxury couldn't heal the wound. Success had made him rich, but it had also made him a target. And soon, Richard Okezie would learn that the price of trust is sometimes paid with blood. It all started with a phone call. Richard had just returned from a silent business trip in Ghana. He was tired. He hadn't eaten all day. His guards were still downstairs. His suit jacket was still on. But the moment his phone rang, he froze. It was a voice from his past. A voice he never wanted to hear again. A voice that once meant loyalty, but now meant danger. Come alone, the caller said. I have something you need to see. Or your empire will burn. Click. No greeting. No name. Just a warning. Richard knew who it was. Morris. His childhood friend turned enemy. The one person who had helped him build Quick Pesa from scratch. And the one person who later betrayed him for money, leaking his company's secrets to foreign investors. Richard had fired him, quietly, without dragging his name in the mud. He paid him off and let him walk away. But that was Richard's mistake. Because Morris wasn't done with him. That night, Richard didn't tell his guards where he was going. He didn't take his private car. He left the mansion alone, wearing a hoodie, driving an old Corolla he once used before wealth found him. He didn't want to be seen. The meeting place was an abandoned warehouse at the edge of Suralire. A place where the lights didn't work and rats danced on broken cement. Richard parked at the corner of a deserted street. The moment he stepped out of the car, it felt like the air grew heavier. But he kept walking. His footsteps echoed. His breath grew louder. Then. Silence. He entered the warehouse. And just as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, a crowbar hit the back of his head. He dropped to the ground, blood already dripping. Before he could even cry out, heavy boots slammed into his ribs. Punches. Kicks. Metal rods. Over and over again. Think you're untouchable, ABI, one voice growled. Another shouted, this is for thinking you could walk away clean. There were 3 of them. All masked. All angry. And all brutal. They beat him like he was nothing. They stole his phone, his wallet, and even spat on his face. But they didn't kill him. No. They wanted him to suffer. They left him bleeding in the alley just behind the warehouse. Face swollen. Lungs barely working. Chest rising, falling, slowing. It was supposed to be the end. No one would find him there. No one cared about a body in that part of town. He was coughing blood, drifting in and out of sleep, when he heard footsteps. At first, he thought it was another attacker. But then, a woman's voice whispered softly, trembling. Oh my God. Jesus. Are you okay? Can you hear me? He couldn't open his eyes. But her hands were real. Her tears were warm. Her fear, genuine. That woman was Rachel. And her arrival changed everything. Rachel had no idea what brought her to that alley that night. She wasn't supposed to pass there. In fact, she always avoided it. It was dark. It was dangerous. But her little son, Junior, had fallen sick again, crying from high fever. And her money was gone. She had just returned from a rejected loan request at her neighbor's house. Her head was heavy. Her feet tired. She had no idea what to do next. Then she saw it. A pair of legs, barely visible behind 2 trash bins. At first, she thought it was a drunk. Or a madman. But as she got closer, she stopped breathing. It was a man. Blood everywhere. Face swollen. Shirt torn. Breathing shallow. Rachel gasped and dropped her phone. Her first instinct was to run. What if this was a setup? But something stronger held her there. She thought of Junior. She thought of her late husband. She thought of what it meant to be left helpless with no one to help. Tears filled her eyes. She picked up her phone and turned on the flashlight. She gently knelt down beside him. Sir, can you hear me? She whispered, hands trembling. No response. She felt his neck. The pulse was faint. But there. She didn't know who he was. But she knew he would die if left there. So, despite her fear, she tried something most people would never do. She pulled his hand over her shoulder. Used all her strength. And dragged him, bit by bit, out of the alley and into the street. Cars passed. People stared. No one helped. Rachel shouted until a Kiki Napep driver finally stopped. She begged him in tears. Promised to pay later. And that night, she took the wounded man to her one-room apartment. Yes. Her house. She had no idea he was a billionaire. He looked homeless. Dirty. Scary even. But Rachel saw a soul, not the scars. She laid him on her mattress. Cleaned his wounds with warm water and salt. Covered his body with her wrapper. And sat beside him, praying quietly into the night. The next morning, he opened his eyes. Just barely. And the first thing he saw was a cracked ceiling, a wooden window, and a woman feeding pap to a small sick boy beside him. "Where am I?" he groaned. Rachel turned. Her eyes widened. "Jesus! You're awake. Who are you?" "I'm Rachel," she smiled nervously. "You were dying. I couldn't leave you." Richard blinked. Pain shot through his ribs. But something else hit him harder. Kindness. The kind he hadn't felt in years. Rachel didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for his name. She just wanted him to survive. For the next few days, she fed him. Changed his bandages. Even borrowed paracetamol from a friend. Each time Richard tried to speak, she'd say, "Rest. You need to get better. That's all that matters." He watched her struggle to feed Junior. He saw how she gave her food to her son and went hungry herself. He saw how she never complained, even when the power went out for 2 straight days. And he realized. This woman who had nothing. Had a heart bigger than most people he'd met in mansions. He never told her his real name. Not yet. He said he was rich. A casual man who had lost everything. A man who had no one. Rachel believed him. And still, she stayed. She let him heal in peace. She even laughed at his dry jokes. She told him stories of her late husband, how she lost him to a road accident, and how life had been war ever since. Richard listened. And every day, something inside him changed. He no longer thought of his mansion. He no longer missed the boardrooms. He just wanted to sit by the window, listen to Junior's giggles, and watch Rachel hum while sweeping. But what he didn't know was, his enemies were still watching. And soon, the secret he tried to bury would explode into a storm. Absolutely. Here is the final concluding section of the story, continuing directly from where section 3 ended. This wraps the tale in a satisfying, emotional, and heartwarming way, while preserving suspense and giving your viewers a powerful ending worth watching till the end. Richard stayed in Rachel's tiny home for 7 more days. Each day, his wounds healed a little. But what healed faster was his soul. He watched how Rachel gave without expecting anything. How she loved her child with all her heart. How she smiled through suffering. How she knelt by her bedside every night and prayed for strangers. He saw in her the one thing billions couldn't buy, purity. One morning, as the sun rose and the air smelled of pap and morning dew, Richard sat beside her. "Rachel," he said softly, "I need to tell you the truth." She paused. "What is it?" "My name is not Rich. It's Richard Okezie." She blinked, confused. "Okay. I'm the owner of Quick Pesa. I'm a billionaire." Rachel stared at him, frozen. Then, she laughed. "You? A billionaire? In my house?" she chuckled. "Stop joking." Richard didn't smile. He pulled out the small wallet they didn't take from him. Inside was a damaged black card. A name. A signature. He brought out his phone, he had recovered it days later, and showed her news articles. His photo. His company. His wealth. Rachel's hands covered her mouth. She stepped back. You're the one I always hear on the radio. He nodded slowly. Yes. And I would have died if you didn't help me. She fell silent. He stood up. Come with me. The next day, a black SUV parked outside Rachel's compound. The entire street came out in shock. Men in suits, bodyguards, flashing lights. Rachel, dressed in her only clean gown, held Junior tightly, afraid. But Richard held her hand and helped her into the car. He took her to Banana Island. Not to visit. To live. They drove into a massive mansion. The size of a small hotel. Chandeliers. Fountains. Staff standing at attention. Rachel stood in the middle of the marble floor, speechless. Tears ran down her face. She didn't belong here, or so she thought. But Richard turned to her. This house is yours now. For saving my life. She shook her head. No. I didn't ask for anything. That's why you deserve everything, he replied. But it didn't stop there. Richard arranged for Junior to go to the best school in Nigeria, fully sponsored. He gave Rachel her own car. Her own staff. Her own private chef. But most importantly, he gave her something no one expected. One of his companies. A growing tech startup he had just launched. He changed the ownership. Put Rachel's name on the documents. Made her the CEO with a full team of advisors. Manage it, he said. Grow it your way. Rachel cried again. Not because of the riches. But because someone finally saw her worth. From a single mom struggling in the slums. To a woman of influence and honor. Rachel never changed. She stayed humble. She used the money to help widows. She built schools. She opened food banks. She gave scholarships in her late husband's name. And one day, during an interview, a journalist asked Richard. What made you give her everything? He smiled. She gave me something more powerful than money, compassion. She saved my life when I had nothing to offer. So I gave her a future because she gave me a second chance at life. Moral of the story. Kindness doesn't cost money. Sometimes, the person you help when no one is watching might be the key to everything you ever prayed for. So don't stop doing good. Your day is coming. Backhand index pointing right. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring true life tales. And share this video with someone who needs hope today. Because sometimes, all it takes is one act of kindness. Yellow heart.